And this is Mike Fader on Sirius XM Left 127. We have a couple of guests tonight. Before we go to our guests, I got some trouble with the headphones. Sound really strange, so maybe we could try to figure something out. Maybe, I don't know. Before we go to our guests later, I want to remind you that always you can go to our sort of alternate political show along with this show. It's on Facebook. Go to Occupied Territory. Occupied Territory, it's called, on Facebook. And you'll be able to post information, respond to, it's kind of like a political blog I write. And you can respond to all this, or you can post opinions of your own, post videos, things like that. Also, if you want to get in touch with me, go to my website. It's called Fader Files, Feder, Files.com. And tonight, right now, actually, we're going to speak to somebody who has collaborated in a conversation really, with Noam Chomsky, and it's called Nuclear War and Environmental Catastrophe. And it's a short book of a conversation between our guest, Lorraine Polk, and Noam Chomsky. Hi.
Hi, Mike.
Let me introduce you to people, and then we can go ahead and talk.
Sure.
Okay. Lorraine Polk is a multimedia artist and a writer. Her articles and investigative reports have appeared in the Dallas Morning News, D Magazine. Is that in Dallas?
Yes.
Okay. And in these Times. We know that place because we've had several writers from there. She is a 2009 grant recipient from the Investigative Fund at the Nation Institute, and produced stories on the political entanglements and compromised science behind the establishment of a radioactive waste disposal site in Texas, situated in close proximity to the Ogallala Aquifer. Oh, man. Does it ever stop?
In Texas, no.
Nowhere. I don't. Actually, I'm going to speak to somebody next week, I think, who got a state judge in Pennsylvania to make a corporation break its confidentiality agreement in a fracking case with somebody. They settled with somebody, a family who sued them. And so it's going on there, too. They want to find out what it is that had to be kept so confidential. So they had some success over there. But so this book is, I guess was it like an interview you did and recorded it and then transcribed it?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And go ahead.
We did two very long in-person interviews at MIT, at Noam's office. And then in between, we did regular email correspondence over a 2.5-year period of time.
And now, probably about half the people listening to this show, it's a national show, they know who Noam Chomsky is. He needs no introduction, but maybe some people do not know him. And can you give us a little introduction to who he is?
To who Noam Chomsky is?
Yeah, a lot of people actually don't really know,
Well, he's...
I mean, I do, you do, but...
Yeah. In academic fields, he's referred to as the father of modern linguistics. And he did some groundbreaking work in the 50s and became a very outspoken person in opposition to the Vietnam War. During the 60s, he wrote a very famous essay in 67, the role of the intellectual. What is the role of intellectuals in the political and social sphere? And from there, he's done numerous collaborations. Edward Herman is one that comes to mind, and manufacturing consent is one of the standards for, media examination. And he continues to be a very prolific activist and gives of his time generously on any number of global issues.
And he's still teaching at MIT?
He doesn't actively teach, but I will tell you, just being in that sphere of going to his office at MIT, he regularly sees other instructors and students who come to ask him questions about linguistics, and sitting in the hallway, I learn more about the world sitting in the hallway waiting for interviews with him than I do reading media sources.
Well, he is possibly one of the intellectual centers of the whole country. So it's interesting you mentioned the that he's up at MIT because he's been at MIT for a long, long, long time. And one of the beginning conversations in the book, or his responses to questions you asked, had to do with scientists sent to MIT on behalf of an agreement between the United States government and Iran way back a ways, and to train Iranian nuclear scientists. You know, one thing that Noam Chomsky is always trying to reveal to people, first of all, because he feels like the media, and correctly, does not do its job and keeps people in ignorance, almost deliberately. But that people don't understand how much of our the government, I should say the government. Sometimes I make a division these days between the government and us. You don't understand, right? How much people don't understand how our government has set up over the decades the people who are now declared villains. And so, for instance, he knows from personal experience of seeing them there that Iranian nuclear scientists and students were trained in nuclear science at MIT with government money. I think it was back in the 60s or 70s, right?
The 70s, uprising.
Yeah.
Well, and the part of the book that we cover about that is that there was substantial student protest, and he was among maybe 5 professors who also stood aligned with the students' position, which that MIT shouldn't take money from the government of Iran to train these students in nuclear engineering. And
it wasn't just because it was Iran. He had that as a principle. We shouldn't be training anybody.
Right. That you just don't rent out your department here, there, or anywhere. And especially not because it is a brutal dictator who's also an ally. He puts that extra dig in there. But I think getting back to what you're saying, and I think it's one of the sentences in the book that really has staying power with me, is that he gets to one point of the conversation and he says, if the pursuit of U.S. policy lasts for 25 years, and it keeps U.S. In contact with oil resources from other places, then policy is a success if it works for 25 years. And that it really just cuts to the bone. And he made that statement in reference to what some security analysts refer to as blowback, which is the long-term consequences of short-term policy decisions.
Well, it's interesting. He talks about this in terms of short-term and long-term because he frequently, when he discusses corporations and corporate influence on government and corporate activities overseas and even in this country, because we're talking here about environmental catastrophe too. I mean, the book is Nuclear War and Environmental Catastrophe from Seven Stories Press. He mentions constantly throughout the book that corporations have a short view of things. They have a short-term view, and it's profit. They don't think in terms of, because the question always comes up, and of course you ask it, and don't we all ask it, is how can these people who live in our country with us and in our world, where we're all living, how can they be poisoning the air and the water? How can they be building these weapons, which in the end are in fact now hurting us and can destroy us in the future? And his answer is, you have to understand that these people don't see past the profits of this quarter or this year.
Yeah.
And the government now in league so much with these people, it's very difficult. But this policy, the thing you mentioned, a policy for 25 years. For instance, here's another example that he brought up in the book too, in response to one of your questions, and it's along the same lines that people have no idea, and he blames the media again, about what happened with the United States in Iraq, how we supplied them and practically helped them win their war against Iran, and then also had Iraqi students come over here and Iraqi scientists to be trained.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, so is there when he's talking about these things, the nuclear war, let me ask you this question. I couldn't understand if this was right or not. Do we still build nuclear weapons? The United States?
Well, that's sort of debatable, but we do. We definitely spend a great amount of money keeping the weapons that we profess to have up to speed. During Bush's presidency, at one point, I mean, he was disastrous for nuclear policy. But one of the more inflammatory things that he proposed was to restart the hydrogen bomb program. And, I think across the board he met resistance on that, like we just cannot go there again. Mm-hmm. But we do spend a lot of money to keep the stockpiles at least, in some shape. There has been an exchange with Russia, believe it or not, a very fruitful exchange, which is, and a lot of people don't know this either, but the Atoms for Peace program that was started by Eisenhower in 1953. Basically, it was a program to provide reactors and highly enriched fuel to other countries, with the idea that if we provided those things, that they would have incentives to try to explore nuclear processes. Therefore, they wouldn't go on to develop weapons. But the problem that it creates for current citizenry is that the highly enriched uranium is closer to being weapons grade. It's a very quick step to making weapons. Mm-hmm. So the U.S. and Russia have been in a partnership because the Soviet Union also did the same and supplied civilian reactors. They've been locked in a partnership to try and recover the highly enriched uranium and to make a switch in those reactors from using highly enriched uranium to some other substitute fuel.
And this program is somewhat successful, right?
Yes, it is. And it's been silently pursued since September 11th. But that is, the concern is we're not just talking about superpowers that have nuclear weapons or even intercontinental ballistic missiles that can deliver nuclear weaponry. It's the unguarded nuclear material that would be used in a nuclear, what's called a dirty bomb. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's not seeking detonation, but it is seeking contamination, long-term and immediate contamination that would result in death and environmental destruction.
That's mentioned here. And also, I think he does say that there's always the possibility that there are two countries, Pakistan and India, who are very close to, he's speculating, obviously, but his opinion is that they're not so far away from using these weapons against each other.
The whole policy of MAD that grew out of the Cold War era, which is the idea that the more weapons a superpower has, mm-hmm. the least likely you are to use them.
Mutual assured destruction, is that?
Mutually assured destruction. But the longer you keep the weapons around, that increases the risk of other things going wrong, which is one, the pilfering of the materials themselves. Two is the state of decline of early warning systems, so it becomes out of the control of human beings. Like there have been close misses, where early warning systems in Russia have said, yes, there's an incoming nuclear bomb. So I'm saying, and he says this too, he says it much more eloquently than I do, but low probability events over a long period of time are not low probability. Mm-hmm. And that these are all things, we're not just worried about a bomb falling from the sky anymore. It is very multi-layered. And now what we're faced with and what the current nuclear dialogue is really pursuit. We're not even discussing actual possession. We're discussing who can pursue nuclear weapons and who can't.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very, very far from the spirit of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And whatever anybody thinks about that treaty, it is a scaffolding that we can build upon
mm-hmm.
and return to, and it's very sound. And part of that scaffolding is the development of nuclear weapon-free zones.
Yeah, I was just going to mention it because this is a lot of the stuff that he mentions in the book, and you're talking about with him, are things that that most people don't really know. And again, as he would tell you, it's the media that either suppressed it or didn't even know about it, didn't do their job. But this whole idea of a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East was news to me. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Okay, and like you're saying, this is the most amazing thing. On one hand, to a certain extent, the media leaves us out of things. But more than that, I think it conditions us to keep looking at the same places for information. Like this morning, I went and Googled the UN and the nuclear weapon-free zone because I wanted to see how many are in place. And it's astounding. There's 5 of these zones. So do you see what I'm saying? Like maybe my local newspaper doesn't discuss these issues in detail, but I can go to Google and look up nuclear weapon-free zones and find information. But basically, it's very, very disappointing to people who work on non-proliferation issues because a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East has been proposed since the 70s, and it was put forth by Egyptian and Iranian Security Council members and calling for a nuclear weapon-free zone that would include, of course, Egypt and Iran, but also Israel. And it has passed every year since. And this last December, there was to be a meeting in Finland to take steps to making this an actuality. And Iran weighed in quickly and said, we will attend. And the U.S. came back and said, we won't come because Iran. It's very devastating.
Well, then you immediately start to wonder what are the ulterior motives in demanding cooperation, and then when it's offered, not responding to it. What is behind that?
Exactly. I mean, if there's no room for negotiation. I say that, but I just read recently that UN personnel are meeting with Iran off to the side because Finland is determined to keep this on the rails.
Right.
This meeting that was planned for December that didn't come to fruition has been in the works for 3 to 5 years. I mean, it was something it was a real milestone, and it was part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and meetings that had come before. So I'm saying it was a long-term objective that everybody was taking steps towards. And then why things fall apart, and that's a very good point that you're making, which is that's where we should be looking. Why do things fall apart? And if the U.S. is not willing to represent, what else can be done? Because
it's. I think one of the things you understand from reading this book. And by the way, we're talking to LaRae Polk, who is a multimedia artist and writer. And the book we're talking about tonight is called "Nuclear War and Environmental Catastrophe," Noam Chomsky and LaRae Polk, which is basically a conversation. And one of the things that gets mentioned throughout the book that Chomsky insists that people try to understand is that we are past the point of our zenith as an empire, and people point that out constantly. But he makes the case that, for instance, and since we're talking about Iran, the United States is in the habit of declaring that this is the way the world should be. In other words, we're the nuclear power. You do what we say. We have these ships. We have these fleets. We have this army. You better not go here. You better not go there. And one thing we did recently, over the last few months or last year or two, I should say, is this embargo, sanctions on Iran, which China, among other people, have just decided to ignore. In other words, he wants people to be aware of the fact that it's not the way it used to be, you know. Mm. And if China, I can't interpret what he's saying, you know, I mean, what's in his mind, but it's almost as if he's saying this is not such a bad thing if other countries start to ignore the United States' threats and dominance.
Well, and I think that it does, and I think it's how he phrases it in the book, that it causes lots of trepidation in the U.S. when other countries aren't following orders. And I would say that other countries are basically going on about their business and a really stark, I guess, example of this in the the Kyoto Treaty.
Right.
The U.S., Canada has declared, you know, we won't sign it, we won't go along. Developing countries have to agree to the same emission discharges as we do. That's overlooking the fact that the U.S. is outsourcing most of its emissions to China. So I'm saying we constantly look for ways to make enemies out of other countries, but we don't want to really look at all the facts. So we're trying to hold them to standards, but they're kind of shouldering a lot of our greenhouse emissions because that's where our things are manufactured.
Mm-hmm. You know, look what happens at China. I mean, every other day I pick up the paper and there are these photographs, I'm sure you see them too, of Beijing, where you can't see a block, not a block, right? And the other day there was an article in the Times about the thousands of children in China, especially in cities, who are in special breathing equipment, you know, infants, this kind of thing. And they're producing, as you say, materials for us, and the use of coal burning and all of this. I mean, one point he makes is, though, with this America declaring this is the way it should be, and it's not that way anymore, is that age-old dominance the United States had over Latin America, and now they're saying we're on our own here, we're building our own societies, take a walk, you know.
Well, I think some of it is just doing what is necessary to keep on going. And I think keep on going for some countries at this point is to be able to grow enough food to feed people and have enough access to clean water. And that's certainly true for countries like Bolivia. Mm-hmm. And it will become more obvious to larger countries because, 50% of oil consumption is allocated to transportation, and that's transportation of food. So more developed countries get their diet from other countries. Mm-hmm. And that's just a fact. So I just think as weather declines in terms of not having access to food, I think that's at the basis of this. We talk about energy sources, but the most basic energy source is that people have to have access to food.
Mm-hmm. So, and he does talk about the use of biofuel as a very serious damage that occurs to the planet, right?
Right, because that's land that could be used for the number one energy source.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's kind of tremendous consumption of energy to maintain a certain lifestyle in this country, and now I think maybe you see it in some other countries is a real problem.
Well, and to consider also that the Western world's idea of how other countries should progress, should develop, is based on our notion, which is fossil fuel consumer culture. And the most stark facts are presented by the oil companies themselves, like BP. There's a paper that's been recently released, and for proven oil reserves, there's only 46 years left.
Jeez. Yeah.
So I'm saying in the book, Noam Chomsky says quite clearly that the reason we can't have open, honest conversations about energy is because of the desire for short-term gains. And I'm saying there it is. That is the demonstrable proof that it's short-term. If we only have, and those are BP statistics, 46 years of oil, 49 years of natural gas, and 100 years of coal. So what is going to happen? I mean, it's very, it's very anxiety-inducing to think about what happens as we get closer to exhausting all those reserves, when everything is predicated on that way of life.
You'd have to have a point of view. Well, here's a question, maybe, what you think about this. Here's a question. Has anybody ever seen the world any differently, either as a group of people or as a world together? I mean, when has the world ever planned for the future? Do you know what I mean? So yeah, in 50 years this, in 100 years that, it seems to make absolutely no difference to about 95% of the people in the world that in 50 years or 100 years, there won't be energy, that kind of energy anyhow, to run anything. And people either don't know or don't care. But has it ever been any different?
Well, and that's a very, very valid point. But you could also say, the major civilizations, that the ones that we point to at the beginning, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, the civilizations that grew up around very fertile bodies of water, once they were able to predict and cultivate agriculture in a way that freed up time for other things and other ways of thinking. I mean, science came about, all kinds of things came about once that number one biological necessities taken care of. It does free the mind to think about other things. And what you're saying, and I absolutely agree with what you're saying, because there's people in Africa that are still using kerosene for cooking and for light, and also using tree and other carbon sources to cook with. And so it's as if what we call the modern world has bypassed them altogether. But what does, and I'll just go to this, what does having illumination at night mean to people who cook with kerosene? It means that children can stay up and do their homework, can do their reading so that they can have education. Where does that go? I don't know. I can't say. But it's interesting in those parts of the world, and I'll just use an example I know very well. I spent some time on the Navajo Nation, and some of the people that I visited with had only known electricity for about 20 years. I mean, they made do, with various kinds of heating oil, etc. And when the government came in and sort of made some determinations and said, well, we can't really run transmission lines for electricity from power plants. It's too expensive to do that initial installation, but it's also based on probability of people being able to meet a monthly utility bill. So what they ended up doing is installing solar panels, which would make people make it possible for those people to have access to energy for cooking, for light, etc. But they're not tethered to a giant power system that requires monthly payment. And I just think that is very interesting. And the people that had the solar panels, they liked them very much because they found them. It's, the sun is a natural source of energy. It fit very well within what they needed and how that energy was procured. And all of us, we're bound by that monthly utility bill. We know about solar panels, but it just seems like it's out of reach.
I think I don't know what Chomsky would say about it, or if there's something in this book. I've read the book, but maybe I missed some things. But there is an essential fact of life, which is sometimes you can't just keep going forward. Sometimes you have to retreat, or you have to give up something. But it seems as if in this country, and maybe in some other countries now, like in India and other places or China, it's always as if the gear shift was stuck in forward. There is no such thing as back. In other words, if we want to transfer to the kind of energy you're talking about and give up this other energy, which is, basically roasting the planet, and it's going to run out anyhow and polluting everything, then there's going to be a period of dip, of loss, while we make a transition, right?
What do you mean by loss?
I think I'm not really sure that we could afford to do, that the government can afford to do both. And correct me if you think I'm wrong. Can we make a transition to solar and wind energy to keep up the same level of energy use that we're used to in this country, which to me is overuse generally? Maybe what we have to do is, what I'm saying is, we have to give up the idea that we can use all this energy all the time. Every night there's 5,000 stadiums lit up, that kind of thing, right? Maybe we have to drop that down. Like if we're in a war situation in World War II, they used to have these signs on the highway saying, "Is this trip necessary?" You could say that about 50% of American life, right?
Well, there's two things to what you're saying, and I get what you're saying, which is a step towards maybe something that's a more conservative sense of how we use energy. Not a complete withdrawal, but but a step down. And there's two things. One is when people start conserving gas, and a lot of people, start to make the decision, we can't take that driving vacation, we can't do, make this many trips to the store. They start making decisions based on economics. The industry calls that demand destruction.
Demand destruction? What is that?
Demand destruction.
What is that?
What that means is the industry then must bring the prices down to encourage the people who are conserving to overconsume. So I'm saying there's a built-in gyroscope with oil, which is when people conserve, there's always going to be a counterbalance. So we can try that. And people have, because the recession in the U.S. has hit people hard, and they are making decisions between how much they can use their vehicle and food and other necessities.
But you're saying that once business becomes aware of this, they'll lower the price of things, which of course affects everything. Employees in this country and other countries where they're outsourced will get even less than they do now, which is hard to believe. But when the prices come down, then that would increase the demand again, and people would consume more. What I'm saying is something even more fundamental in that, is that maybe in this country, as consumers, we have to finally figure out that it doesn't matter what the price of something is. Maybe we don't need it anyhow.
Well, I almost think too, and just following this thread of thought, that so the oil companies have this idea, so they'll lower the prices, and that will induce the consumers who are being conservative to think, well, I'll just consume again because things are back to normal.
I'll buy that big car, I'll take that trip, whatever.
This state of, things are okay, things are back to normal, is what keeps our habits in continuance, and we can't see new options.
Mm-hmm.
And in Texas, this was the second point I was going to bring up, is that in West Texas, there are enormous wind farms, and we can actually generate almost 29% of energy from those turbines. But a big problem is we have some politicians who put a chokehold on the ability to build new transmission lines.
Well, these are the people who are actually bribed by the petroleum industry, right?
Well, I'd say the petroleum industry, but also we have what's called a uranium zone in Texas, and so politicians around that area, they're looking for that resurgence in nuclear power, civilian power. So there's lots of reasons to continually, and this is the strange thing. It's kind of a ridicule of sustainable energy because Texas has model conditions for solar and turbine.
Mm-hmm.
Is that when you go to West Texas and drive around, on almost all the farms, what you see are windmills, and those windmills are what made it possible to tap into the Ogallala aquifer, which is underground, and bring those water sources to the top to be able to support irrigation and agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of a funny dichotomy in thinking. Like, at one point, the idea of wind turbines, a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
And it made settlement of some pretty impossible places possible. But if you apply that same idea of a turbine that runs off wind, that generates something that performs a function that's renewable, in terms of providing energy, people go nuts.
Well, why is it that people can't see the obvious connections? I mean, is there some reason? I mean, people aren't just uniformly idiots. I mean, why can't they see the connection?
The connections between old thinking, new thinking, and what we must do.
Yeah, how about that? I mean, is that so difficult?
I think it is.
And why is it so difficult?
For people in the U.S., because I can only speak from that point of view, I think.
Yeah.
I think because we are cultivated to be consumers, and from day one, we're bombarded with so many media messages. Even our news comes, with consumerist messages. Even this idea of continually affirming to people that things are normal. So go out and shop, go out and purchase.
Well, you remember what Bush said right after 9/11.
Go shop.
Go shop.
It's just bizarre, but I'm saying that in most what we call major media, it is about shoring up the idea that everything's fine, it's normal, spend as usual.
Well, you see the astounding, surreal cognitive dissonance of looking at something like MSNBC, where they might do something about the BP oil spill that a major media won't do, or rather the NBC, that NBC or ABC won't do, and then they'll take a break for a commercial from BP telling you how they're helping everybody.
Right, and and I think that we go about life looking at these things and having none of that cognitive dissonance. And I'm saying once we become settled and say, I take on the responsibility for interpreting these messages. But more than that, I know people from other countries that are born into horrible situations that are forced to be political their whole life because every day is a political battle of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
And they relocate to America and they cannot believe. It's like we have so much freedom to information, to express what we think about that information.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we don't exercise it.
I wonder sometimes if if beyond that, some people are so used to expressing their opinion and have so many avenues to express things that they think they actually did something or changed something once they clicked on a petition or said something in a blog. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's true too. And I don't know what constitutes real change. I mean, I don't, or consensus.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I think happens very spontaneously, like the Occupy movement was. It just happened so organically. Why it couldn't be sustained, I know it is in various forms, but we certainly don't hear much about it.
Well, I, there are other things I do, about the Occupy movement too. I spent a lot of time devoted to that, and there's a lot of people who were involved and who are still involved who say that it's very much alive as a root fire and could flare up any time. But you have to wonder sometimes when things get worse and worse, and you don't see massive demonstrations. I mean, some of the things that are happening in Texas, for instance, that I read about in other places, where people who are in opposition to the tar sands pipeline. Yeah. The XL pipeline, they're chaining themselves to tractors. Mm-hmm. They're putting themselves in front of trucks. They're chaining themselves to pipes. They won't give up their farms, even though they've been, declared public domain or whatever. But these are individual actions. Maybe what will happen is these individual actions, which I see all over the place, will finally unite.
That would be great, and that's a very good point that you brought up, which I would like to mention is that I do believe the biggest environmental movement to be happening is happening right here in Texas and Oklahoma, and you're absolutely right. There are people every day chaining themselves to equipment at great risk, and I've been to visit one of the people involved in this. And it was actually his neighbor that told him that TransCanada had been on his property. His neighbor is a gun-toting Tea Partier. And for him, the violation was this corporation came on his property and started flagging where they wanted the pipe to go without notifying anybody.
Well, that's amazing.
And when... It's not just the media blackout about what's going on. It's kind of the geographical facts of Texas, which is it's a big place, and some of these areas where this is happening, it really is in heavily wooded areas outside of small towns. And when the sheriffs and TransCanada they swoop down on these people that not only chain themselves to equipment, but they erect these poles and sit on the top, and they have guide wires that are actually connected to TransCanada's equipment, so that if you were to try and take the person off the pole, it's a very delicate situation. I mean, they have to bring in cherry pickers. It does stop. It stops the construction for at least the day.
And
it's very isolated.
I was just going to say, this is the kind of story, though, if when somebody God forbid some kid falls down a well, right? This is an old news story. And every place in a country will send a truck, they'll send helicopters, satellite trucks, whatever it is, to cover this every minute. But something like this could be the same thing. But then you're wandering into corporate media, and that's a problem. Like Chomsky would point that out real quick.
Well, again, getting back to that idea of creating what is normal, and we cannot brush up against business interest. We can't even have a discussion of why this might be damaging. And the biggest thing is, and people, you continue to hear it, is that Obama didn't approve the Keystone Pipeline. He capitulated to the environmentalists. And the truth of the matter is, and it's usually how all political moves occur, he actually approved the southern leg, and that's what we're talking about. So at the same time, we're being told this is the way it is. It's very contrasty. We're divided into very clean camps of those who support and those who don't. He didn't approve this pipeline that would provide jobs. Well, he did. He He approved the southern leg that does not require the State Department. The other part that comes from Canada down to Cushing, Oklahoma, it involves other entities.
Well, I don't have any money, and maybe you don't have any either. And we could bet the $10 that we own jointly that these two organizations, the executive and the State Department, will approve this pipeline. But it's just the failure of media is beyond sinful. It's like it's just almost a kind of evil in itself. We only have a couple of minutes, and
Sure.
Let me re-identify this. The book is Nuclear War and Environmental Catastrophe, Noam Chomsky and Laray, that's Laray, Polk, a conversation about some fascinating subjects, important subjects. We only have about maybe 2 minutes left before we have to go to a break. Can you just say what he thinks about the future? Is he optimistic or what?
I have always found him to be quite optimistic. He talks about the gains that have been made in the the last 100 years in terms of rights. There's minority rights, women's rights, gay rights are on the horizon. There's no doubt that those will be addressed. So even though people tend to think that he has a very dire prognosis about human nature, I actually think that his view is quite optimistic.
All right. Well, it's always good to end with something like that. All right. So the book again, Nuclear War and Environmental Catastrophe, 7 Stories Press, available presumably everywhere. And thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Mike, for inviting me.
Sure. Okay. This is Mike Fader on Sirius XM Left 127. We're going to go to a break and we'll be back. Okay, back again. Don't forget to, if you have any comments about any of this, or you're on the spot, let's say you're down in Texas and you have some reports, anything you want to do, just go to our Occupied Territory Facebook page, and you can respond to stuff I post on there, and you could put things on there yourself. Also, don't forget, you're all free. It's a free country. Is it a free country? You're free to call this radio station. When I later on, when I ask for calls, please do me a favor and call up. I have this constant correspondence with people. They write me emails after the show, many emails, more all the time. I guess there's more listeners, and saying, I was thinking of calling, or I was afraid to call, but I'd like to call. Do it. Just do it. It's no big deal. You think I'm not nervous being on the radio because I don't shut up? That's probably why I don't shut up, because I'm nervous. You can call up. It's not a problem. Just pretend you're talking to me. You might be at any given time of the night. Who knows how many people are listening? All right. So we have a guest after the 6 o'clock news. We're going to talk about this issue, the whole idea of this not reading the Miranda rights. Remember we talked about this and people had very passionate feelings about this last week, but not reading Miranda rights. And this thing called the public safety exception, where people aren't given their right to counsel, aren't advised that they have the right to remain silent, and whether these things can be used at court. I did some research on this, more actually from the FBI website than any place else. The best article I saw on this was from the FBI website, which of course has a point of view on this questioning. But they did provide basic information about where this original case came from, why the Supreme Court in 1984 made this decision. So we've got somebody on here, a law professor, to talk about these issues. And once again, maybe we can take your calls on this, and we will proceed from there. All right, I had enough talking. Put some music on, and we'll just come back after the 6 o'clock news with more. Okay, we're back. This is Mike Fader, Sirius XM Left 127. You will remember, those of you who are loyal listeners, that we had an active discussion, actually a very sort of passionate discussion last week about this whole idea of Miranda rights versus the public safety exception. And some people were very, very clear about the fact that they thought if there is an immediate danger of more explosions, more bombs, hundreds more people being killed or wounded, that there was no reason whatsoever to grant this suspect up in Boston any of his rights, or anybody like that. And there are similar situations in which people's Miranda rights should just evaporate, at least temporarily, or be restricted severely. And this is an ongoing argument, and there's everything from one position, which is let's say a very right wing Lindsey Graham, somebody in the Senate, somebody like that might say, well, they're all enemy combatants. Lock them up in Guantanamo. Do whatever you want to them. They have no rights, even if they're American citizens. Just throw them in a clink and don't give them one right at all. All the way to the other end, where you get purists, maybe from some people in the ACLU or something, who say that under no circumstances whatsoever should an American citizen be denied their rights as laid out by the courts. Well, the public safety exception was laid out by the courts. So to further discuss this, we have a guest on, Paul Finkelman, who is the President William McKinley Distinguished Professor of Law and Public Policy and Senior Fellow in the Government Law Center at Albany Law School. And so I can't say right off the bat, where do you stand on this, but it's an issue, right?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is if you're looking for right-wing senators, my God, Lindsey Graham is moderate these days.
I guess that's true. I mean, it could be Ted Cruz. I don't know, but there are people who say
we don't have to debate that, but I think actually Lindsey Graham is a pretty reasonable person.
I think he wanted to declare this particular person an enemy combatant.
He did, but he backed off from that, and I think he may not have really thought it through. In a moment of crisis, people often, even politicians, can you believe it, say stupid things in a moment of crisis.
Even radio hosts.
Even radio hosts, that's right, and even guys who are talking to you on the radio, on the telephone.
But a law professor would never say anything like that.
From your mouth to God's ear, as my grandmother would say.
So, I mean, this issue, I mean, obviously, it took about 3 or 4 days. You can only speculate. The FBI got what it wanted. They were satisfied. Maybe he wasn't linked up to another immediate threat. That that was that. So then he enters the regular legal system. Yeah. And there was a magistrate at his bedside, right, when he was arraigned. Was it arraigned? Was he arraigned?
No, well, I think he was. Yeah, when he was arraigned.
Yeah.
I mean, if I were on the Supreme Court, which I will never be, but if I were asked to make a decision on this, or I were asked to write a statute for this, I would suggest that if we need a public safety for the Miranda warning, the public safety exception should be as it is now, voluntary. That is, you can't stick pins under the guy's fingernails to make him talk, but people are free to voluntarily talk.
Mm-hmm.
And that the police are free to ask them questions voluntarily, but that evidence shouldn't be used to convict the person. And that way you preserve the right against self-incrimination, which is, I think, a central right of a free society. It's a central right of our society, of a democratic society.
No, that's based on the Fifth Amendment, right?
It's based on the Fifth Amendment, but it's rooted in the 17th century fights in England between King Charles I and his opponents, and of course, eventually King Charles I was beheaded during the English Civil War. So it's the fight for the right against self-incrimination. It precedes the Bill of Rights by 150 years,
mm-hmm.
but it is, of course, in the Fifth Amendment, and it's an important right. At the same time, I think everybody understands that there are moments when those people who bravely go after bad guys, and I don't care what your politics are,
mm-hmm.
There are bad guys out there. There are people who are doing bad things. I don't think that, I haven't heard anybody justify what happened in Boston.
Well, no, you're not going to hear that except in some small circles overseas in some places, probably.
Right.
Yeah.
So clearly these were bad guys. These are guys who were perfectly capable of having bombs in other places. And so it seems reasonable that the first thing you would do when you capture one alive, as soon as he can talk, is, are there more bombs? Where are they? What kind of bombs there are? How do we dispose of them?
Well, according to a lot of this is all speculation, because I guess the facts of it is that he, I don't know if he was capable of speech, but he nodded his head or wrote answers to questions, and then after a certain point, he was given his rights. And
right.
Yeah, but apparently, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, all I'm saying is that you can both have the constitutional protection that people can't be in a position to self-incriminate.
Well, can I ask you
and
one?
at the same time protect public safety. Certainly, we don't need his confession to convict him of a zillion things.
Right. But obviously, the questioning there, without the public safety exception, was exercised because they felt that there was an imminent danger to the way that the Supreme Court worded it. We should go back to the case. It's based on a case. I think it happened in Queens, in New York City.
Right. It's a New York case.
Quarles.
The Quarles case. But my only point is where I would disagree with the Quarles case is that I don't think that the statements made should be admissible against the guy in the prosecution.
Well, maybe we should go over that just as a basic. Okay. So here's this man. The cops are advised that somebody is in a store. I think it was a grocery store.
Yeah, he had just raped somebody.
Right, and she ran and told the police.
She describes him to a T, including his the jacket that he's wearing.
With words on the back of the jacket.
Yeah, that's right, and that he said he's armed.
Okay, so the cops go in. They see the guy. They chase him down. They hold him. They hold him down or whatever. They grab him. And one of the cops notices that he has a holster, an empty holster. And he says, "Where's the gun?" Because could be a danger to anybody, right? And it could be in another pocket that he has, or it could be somewhere he stowed it. And in fact, it was down the aisle somewhere where he dropped it in a basket or something.
Right.
And then he told him where the gun was. And of course, later on, a court, I don't know where along the line, threw out the gun conviction, the weapons conviction, and threw out because they didn't give him his rights, first of all.
Right. And my view is trying to balance the need for public safety with fundamental civil liberties for all Americans is that the answer should be, if you ask him a question before he's Mirandized, then you're free to ask that question. You simply shouldn't be able to use that piece of evidence in a court. Presumably, in this case, if he had raped this woman, there would be lots of other evidence, DNA evidence available. There would be her testimony that he had a gun. There would be the police testimony that he, had an empty holster.
Mm-hmm. And then later on they find a gun.
Well, they could either say, or the court might say, you can't use the gun as evidence because that's what he told you, and that's self-incrimination. Even if you don't get him on the gun charge, you've got him on a whole bunch of other things.
But the case makes its way all the way up the line to the Supreme Court, and this is where I think it was Sandra O'Connor, maybe, but I'm not sure. Said that in some cases there's what we would call a public safety exception. And that's if there's a danger to the police at the moment, and also perhaps to the public, then you can do that. But you still can't use that evidence in court?
Well, you can. I mean, you see, this is where I disagree with the court. You see, my argument would be we have to separate out two separate issues here. The first issue is public safety. The first thing that a first responder, whether it's a fireman, a policeman, an ambulance driver, there are all kinds of first responders. Mm-hmm. The first thing that a first responder has to do is to be concerned about the public safety of the people around him and about his own personal safety or her own personal safety, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you are in a situation where you have arrested a guy and this holster is empty and you know he had a gun, it seems perfectly reasonable that before you Mirandize him, before you take the time to Mirandize him, before you take the time to have him decide, do I want a lawyer now or not?
Or to remain silent.
Or to remain silent. You ask him the very critical question, where is the gun?
Mm-hmm. Or where are the bombs?
Or where are the bombs? Or are there any more bombs?
Right.
Or do you have an accomplice hiding around the corner?
Mm-hmm.
All of these things are perfectly legitimate and reasonable things for, I think, law enforcement to be able to ask. My point simply would be that having asked that and gotten that information, that specific narrow piece of information shouldn't be then brought into the courtroom and say, well, we're convicting you because you were a nice enough guy, however much of a bad guy you were a nice enough guy to tell us where the gun is so some 6-year-old didn't blow his head off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we, and having done that, he shouldn't be then penalized because at that moment he decided to be a decent citizen instead of the creepy person he always was before. Or he had been before. I don't know if he always was. And so my view would be, we could have a balance here. We allow the first responders to do the immediate public safety question without a Miranda warning. And after that, you say, okay, now you're under arrest, and we're going to read you your rights.
But there's a limit on things. In other words, you can't ask him, where did you get the gun? Who sold it to you?
You can't.
How many times have you used this gun before?
That's right. None of that. You can only ask him, what is the public safety? I mean, the reality is that with the guy in Boston, I don't see how the public safety exception could come into play at all.
What? Really?
Well, because he's in the hospital unconscious for many, many hours, right? They can't ask him anything for a couple of days, apparently.
But still,
so then, I suppose then there's obviously no immediate threat. They're not saying, "Do you have a bomb hidden on you?" He's obviously had all of his clothing removed. He's in a hospital.
But he was driving in a car, and apparently, see, all of this is I can only say apparently or blah blah blah. So apparently, some bombs were tossed out of this car.
Right, but I'm talking about after he's arrested.
Yeah, but even so,
in a boat.
But this is where people bring into there's the world outside the immediate arrest, which is to say, these people. Let's leave profiling aside for a moment.
Let me
I'm sorry.
interrupt you. Yeah. Are you saying that when he was driving before, he was throwing bombs out of the car?
Well, apparently, what was happening was that he and his brother were in this hijacked car.
Right.
And they were tossing pipe bombs, or what was later identified, or very soon identified as pipe bombs, out of the car. I don't know what they had on them when they shot and killed one of them. Apparently, there may have been other munitions or other bombs. I really don't know. They had the testimony of the person who was hijacked, who said they were going to drive to New York. And maybe, I don't know if he said maybe they were going to do something down there, that they had told this guy that that's what they were going to do with the car.
No, I hear all that. But what I'm saying is that...
But even though the man was rendered helpless and he's lying in a hospital bed, still out there could be accomplices or associates or other bombs, right?
Right. Okay. And here's the tough legal issue. Okay. You arrested him in a boat. He's almost dead because he's bleeding. He is not conscious and certainly not in any condition to ask any questions. And given, I don't know if I once gave blood and passed out from giving blood. If they'd woken me up and asked me questions, I don't think I could have told them my name.
Right.
All right? And if I told them my name, you wouldn't trust that I was right at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So given that condition, anything they ask him in the first day after he's arrested is probably not possible. They probably can't ask him anything. So at that point, hasn't the immediate public safety time frame disappeared?
What, is there a time frame always?
Well, there has to be a time frame because you can't say, well, we've arrested you and we're going to hold you for 48 hours and keep talking to you without a Miranda warning, without a right to see an attorney.
Mm-hmm.
We can't do that because then we have become Nazi Germany. Then we've become Soviet Russia. Then we've become North Korea. Because we're locking people up and we're interrogating them and we're not giving them any rights. We have become the enemy. I mean, the hardest thing about the war on terror is this, that if you start acting like the bad guys,
mm-hmm.
then you become like the bad guys.
Well, yeah, I mean, then it becomes a question of who actually is the terrorist or what is a terrorist. So
that's right. I mean, this was the problem with the what the Bush administration quaintly called enhanced interrogation techniques.
Right.
If they are torturing people, then how does that make us different than the people we're torturing? And
well, yeah, that conversation extends outward and backward to drones and dropping bombs in Hiroshima.
Well, it what the Bush administration quaintly called enhanced interrogation techniques.
Right.
If they are torturing people, then how does that make us different than the people we're torturing? And
well, yeah, that conversation extends outward and backward to drones and dropping bombs in Hiroshima.
Well, Well, it may depend on that. I mean, I would actually defend the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima for a lot of reasons.
Well, you know what? Let me.
And I don't think I think this is actual wartime is very different than.
Well, we're in a war now. We're on a war on terror. We're in a war on terror, according to the administration, both administrations.
Yeah, we're also still in a war on drugs that Nixon declared 50 years ago.
How do you win a war on terror?
Well, I don't want to go there.
Oh, all right. Let's get back to this.
Unless you want me on for 3 hours, we can.
Sure.
We can
why not? Well, we'll run over into the NHL play. We'll run over into the playoffs. But here, let me be devil's advocate. Maybe that would help. I'm the FBI agent right there, right? I've investigated. I've been on the counterterrorism task force for 10 years on the FBI. I've made 60 arrests. There's been 500 cases, apparently. I spoke to somebody at the Brennan Center about this.
Yeah.
In the last 10 years, there's been something like 500 cases successfully brought by the federal government against people under various terrorism laws. But okay, so 10 years I'm on this squad. I know the profile of people who do this. I know where these guys come from, a part of the world where terrorism is, I can't say, a commonplace thing, but it's pretty frequent. I know because I'm in the FBI that we investigated the older brother, for visiting a place on behalf of Russia where there is terrorist activity. I know all these things. I know the kind of bomb that was set are bombs that are frequently used by terrorists and have been used in various other places. I know all of these things. Meanwhile, I'm going to talk to this guy once he becomes conscious. The first thing I'm going to think is, or I have a right to think, is that there could be other people he's associated with. And I would also very much like to know, of course, where this stuff came from. Once he clams up, I might never ever know this.
Right. And my point is this, that those questions that you've asked, where's other people? Where is his little bomb-making factory? Or, how did he learn how to make bombs, etc.? Those questions are not an immediate public safety question. They are a longer-term public safety question. It's not that they're not a public safety question, but because you see, if I follow your devil's advocate argument, then what we would say is well, okay, we can let's ship this guy to Guantanamo and question him for a couple of weeks or months.
There's no end to that thing.
And waterboard him until he tells us who his associates are. Mm-hmm. As a democracy, as a free country, we don't want to go there. And there are lots of reasons why we don't want to go there.
So this arrest is this arrest.
This arrest is this arrest. It is a specific issue, and that's why if we go back to the to the case where the doctrine comes from, here you have a specific immediate question: where is this specific gun that we were told you're carrying, and you have an empty holster?
Mm-hmm.
We're not asking you where you bought the gun. We're not asking you how many of your friends own guns. We're not asking you if you're part of a gang that owns guns. We only want to know what is specifically necessary to prevent an immediate, instant, violent issue.
So,
and what I'm saying is, and by the way, I'm been a pretty strong civil libertarian my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in any way politically conservative on anything that I know of. But I think that it is perfectly reasonable to say that under the immediate, instantaneous public safety doctrine, you ought to be able to ask them that. And what I'm saying is that in order to preserve at the same time the fundamental liberties of all Americans, the other thing is that this information, while useful to the police at the moment, should not be used in the courtroom because it was done before the guy had been read his Miranda rights.
So when this case does appear in court, in federal, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
I am perfect. I'm also perfectly. I believe that in almost all cases like this, the police never need this evidence to get the conviction.
I personally, observing these things for as long as I have, though I'm not a lawyer, I was pleasantly surprised to see him appear into the justice system so quickly, first of all, considering everything else that goes on. And secondly, I thought to myself, the first thing I thought, which maybe other people thought too, is they got what they need to make a case, or they wouldn't be, popping this guy into the court system so quick.
Oh, look, they have him. They have him for 100 things. If nothing else, okay, let's suppose that we don't want to go to terrorism route.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to go anything else. They have him for kidnapping.
Right.
They have him for carjacking. They have him for resisting arrest, shooting at an officer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many times do you want to give him a life sentence?
Right.
So if the interrogation is for the purpose of where is the bomb, you don't need that for the conviction.
But now that he's so now you've got everything on him. They're going to prove their case, I'm sure, because it's just what you said. They've got all this stuff on him on I don't know how many different counts with different kinds of charges. So they will get him, and he'll be in jail for a long time or forever. But
my hope is that he will be in a concrete box for a very, very, very long time.
Mm-hmm. So,
by the way, I hope they don't go for the death penalty.
So that exists in Massachusetts. Oh, that's the federal.
There's
federal. Yeah.
They could do a federal death penalty. I hope they do not go for the death penalty. I hope they do not.
Why do you hope that? Why do you hope that? Are you against it for principal reasons?
I'm against the death penalty for both ethical reasons.
Okay.
But I'm also against the death penalty because I think it's stupid. The fact is we may not find out in the next year or two who his friends and accomplices are. He may have none, or he may have some.
Mm-hmm.
He may not tell us. And by the way, even without Miranda, he's not unlikely to tell us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we execute him, we'll never find out. If we don't execute him, who knows when he might talk. I'll give you a really weird example.
Sure.
We rushed to execute Timothy McVeigh for the Oklahoma City bombing.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, to tell you how brave I am, I put that in quotes on this.
Yeah.
I published an editorial in USA Today, an op-ed in USA Today, urging that Timothy McVeigh not be executed. I was living in Oklahoma at the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I got my share of hate mail from people who say, "How can you do this?" Well, one of the things I said is that we do not know if he had any other accomplices. Well, people just wanted to execute him. They wanted vengeance. Okay, we execute him. Then along comes 9/11, and there are rumors floating that maybe Tim McVeigh got help from Al-Qaeda.
Really? That's
now,
the first I ever heard of that.
Oh, no, those were around for a while. Now, who knows if it's true? How do we find out? We don't. But we're never going to find out because, of course, Timothy McVeigh was executed, and therefore we're never going to get any information from him again. So my view is that executing people is stupid because you are, in fact, executing people often who you might want to interrogate sometime down the road. The other problem with executing is we know that a significant number of innocent people are convicted every year.
Oh, yeah. We see that all the time.
We see that all the time. I remember sitting with a judge in Oklahoma, having lunch with her, and we were friends, and I was asking her, what kind of docket she had. And she said, well, I've just left the criminal docket, now I'm doing civil. And I said, well, did you have any capital cases?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, yeah, I had one capital case. And I said, what was the outcome? She said, well, I sentenced 2 people to death.
Wow.
The day that we were having lunch, on the front page headline of the Tulsa, Oklahoma paper was a story about somebody who had been just exonerated after about 10 years in jail for a rape because the DNA evidence showed that he clearly was innocent.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it was a bad trial, not that he didn't have good representation, that he was simply the wrong guy.
Well, not to want to wander too far afield here, because
give me 1 second. So
yeah.
I turned to this woman and I said, and so are you? Did you have any qualms about this? And she said to me, the crimes that these guys were convicted of were horrible crimes, and they deserve to die. And I said, and are you certain? How do you know that? How can you be so certain that they're the ones? And she said, well, the jury thought so, and the evidence was strong.
Mm-hmm.
And I just pointed to the newspaper and I said, the jury in this case thought the evidence was strong too. And she turned white.
Mm-hmm.
She just blanched because we don't think about the fact that we could be making mistakes. So I think for policy reasons, as well as in this case for anti-terrorism reasons, the last thing in the world we should be doing is executing this fellow. him alive forever, and maybe someday he'll tell us things we need to know.
Let me ask you this question. Beneath the justice system, beneath laws that we need for civilization, there are human emotions. There are human feelings. Now, over a period of, let's say, thousands of years or hundreds of years, we have evolved as a group of people, collectively and individually, perhaps, to see things differently. There was slavery. Nobody, people didn't like it, but it was accepted. Women couldn't vote. You name it. There's a million things.
Lots of people liked slavery. Don't misunderstand.
Well, but, there was a time when certain things were accepted, put it that way, which are unacceptable and even unthinkable now, okay?
That's right. I think that's a better way of looking at it.
I knew I'd find it if I groped long enough. Okay, so there it is right there. Now, what about the concept of, now let me put this in a very graphic way. Let's say it's your daughter, your son, your wife, right, who got, mutilated or killed at that moment. Or let's say it's just some store robbery and somebody shoots somebody who is close to you. There's a human feeling of vengeance. It's a natural feeling, isn't it?
So does this make me Mike Dukakis running for president against George H.W. Bush? Because that's the question that candidate Dukakis was asked, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know Mike Dukakis. He's a superb guy. He's very smart. He didn't answer the question the way he might have.
Oh, that's right. They asked what if his wife was raped or something?
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
And he gave a very good answer if it were a law school exam.
Well, we're not running for office now, and I'm not trying to make points to him.
Right. Okay, and my answer would be very different.
Okay.
I would say that I might personally desire to strangle that person.
Mm-hmm.
I might personally desire to want to beat that person to death with a baseball bat.
Mm-hmm.
But that is not what a civilized society does. And personal vengeance and anger is, first of all, not going to bring my loved one back. It's not going to bring my friend back. No matter how many people we haul up in Guantanamo, my friends who died in 9/11 are not going to come back. No matter how many people we execute, they are not going to come back. So killing one person is not going to bring back somebody else. Furthermore, of course, killing one person that you do not have to kill hardly sends a message that killing is wrong. I mean, if in other words, there's something deeply ironic for a society about saying that, well, killing is wrong, and therefore we're going to kill you.
Which certifies that killing is wrong.
Well, yeah, which of course clearly doesn't certify that killing is wrong.
Yeah, right.
So the emotion. But by the way, when McVeigh was being executed, there were a number of people who were relatives of the victims of the Oklahoma bombing who did not want him executed.
I think I recall that. Yeah.
Because they said it's not going to bring our kids back. It's not going to bring my wife back, my husband back, my child back, my parent back. That's not going to do anything. It's just going to kill one more person. So from the emotional standpoint, there's not a lot. By the way, I think people don't feel better when the person who killed their relative is executed.
It doesn't give them a sense of a relief
there have been studies done. I'm not a psychologist,
right.
but I don't think there's any evidence that people suddenly feel psychologically so much better. Now, and again, the other side of it is that, and this is perhaps not a. There will be some of your listeners will think I'm terrible for saying this. I'm sure they'll say I'm very insensitive or something. But you know something? There may be something gratifying about seeing the guy from Boston sitting in a concrete box for the rest of his life, knowing that for 23 and a half hours a day he's in a box, and for half an hour he gets to walk around and get some fresh air. And I think that sends a much more powerful message to a would-be terrorist than executing him.
Well, the lesson there is if you do something so awful like that, then we're going to separate you from other people, which is the ultimate punishment.
That's right. Yeah. And furthermore, if you are prepared to die as a martyr, as he apparently was, I mean, the news stories I've read is that he tried to kill himself and botched the job. So if you're willing to die for your cause, if you're willing to be a martyr, then the worst thing that could happen to you is that you're not allowed to be a martyr, but instead you are locked up in a box where you can't be a martyr. I mean, again, for somebody like Timothy McVeigh. I think it would have been much more beneficial to society for 10 years, 15 years after the Oklahoma bombing for people to see a photograph of an aging, gaunt Timothy McVeigh sitting in solitary confinement for the rest of his life.
Well, then they also might see that he got God and that he's counseling other prisoners and that he's written a book, you know.
He might do that, and that's fine, you know. I mean, even the most horrendously awful people can contribute to the world. He might, in fact, I mean, the kid who did the bombing in Boston might, in fact, someday recant what he had done and say, what I did was wrong. I now know it's wrong. I don't think people should do this.
Which would be of great instruction to the general world.
That's right. But executing him, he then goes down as a martyr for, and we don't even know quite what he wants to be a martyr for. Is he a martyr for Islam?
He may not even know either. He's 19 years old.
Yeah, I mean, at one level, I feel sorry for him. He's a 19-year-old kid who is, ruined countless lives, including his own, and he probably doesn't even know why.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe 20 years from now, he will write a book saying, this is why I think I did it, and I was awful and stupid, and I hope nobody will follow me down that road.
You know, this one issue of, by the way, if you just tuned in, you're listening to Paul Finkelman, who is the President William McKinley Distinguished Professor of Law and Public Policy and Senior Fellow in the Government Law Center at Albany Law School. Are there articles, books, right? What are the most recent books people could read that you've written?
Well,
or did you know?
I mean, my most interesting book these days, and I think I talked about this last time I was on, is a book called Slavery and the Founders, which has got a lot of play because I write in part about Jefferson and slavery.
Mm-hmm.
So that's now. If you really want to sort of get totally into constitutional law and civil liberties and everything, I'm the co-author of a 2-volume book called A March of Liberty, A Constitutional History of the United States, that Oxford University Press publishes. And you could, if somebody is listening to this and say, okay, I really want to understand the development of the Constitution, I'm pretty proud of that. I think it's a terrific way of understanding, but it's not, it's not an evening read.
No, is there a website that people can go to?
You can go to paulfinkelman.com, all one word, PaulFinkelman.com. You can also go to the website at Albany Law School, which is albanylaw.edu.
Let me ask you this question. You mentioned a couple of times in the course of this discussion, and this is sort of expanding it or covering another area which is connected to it. You mentioned Guantanamo. And you see what's going on down in Guantanamo now is this very widespread hunger strike. And there are still people locked up down there who have never been charged, who may never be charged. And they are beginning, one of the reasons that they say, the reports say that people are doing this is because it's dawning on so many people that finally they may be there forever and they will never get out and they will never have a trial. They're not even told what they did. They're not even going through the procedures. And so there's nothing left but despair, right?
That's right, and I think it's both wrong and stupid.
Well, there were some people let go from Guantanamo. What was there was a surge, to use a certain word, of people let go from Guantanamo, right? And then what happened with all that? Why are these people still remaining there? Why are they not tried in one way or another? You have to speculate, but
this is partially beyond my expertise, and of course, it's very rare when you get an academic who says that anything is beyond their expertise.
Yeah, I'm already like sitting back in my chair, but I'll persevere. Anyhow,
but here's what I think. Okay, and I get this by talking to friends who know more about this than I do.
Mm-hmm.
That most of the people left in Guantanamo are in fact very bad actors in terms of Al-Qaeda and terrorism, and that the government doesn't know what to do with them because they, on one hand, absolutely know that they're bad actors. They were picked up in the battlefield. They were picked up in the heat of battle. And yet there's not any evidence that would work for a trial. You're not sure how you try them or what you try them with. It's kind of a brave new world. Now, you see, if this were a traditional war,
Uniforms, national sovereignty.
Yeah, all that. Okay, so we defeated the enemy. We had the enemy POWs, and then we either charge the enemy POWs with war crimes, which is very unusual. Only, a few people get that. Or we send them home. We repatriate them. What you don't do in a civilized society is to keep them locked up in the Gulag Arca Caribbean forever. And that's the danger. After World War II, we repatriated probably hundreds of thousands of German POWs. There were obviously some that we, in fact, charged with war crimes and prosecuted, and some were executed, others were imprisoned. But the Soviets kept hundreds of thousands of German POWs for a very long time. There may still be some alive.
Talk about vengeance.
Yeah, talk about vengeance. They should have returned them. They didn't. It was pure vengeance. It was a kind of a throwback to our barbaric ancient world.
But here's the thing: this government, sometimes when I say the government these days, it sounds like a separate nation to me. It's not my government as much as what once was, perhaps. But Bush and then Obama. They and especially Bush. These wars were fought for, or they were perpetrated on these various places for democracy. In other words, we were protecting our democracy, and we were showing the world, according to Bush, we were bringing democracy to these places. It shows the world exactly the opposite. This is sort of what you were saying before about killing, people. It shows the world the opposite when we keep people locked up and then say they hate us for our freedoms.
Right. I would make.
We should put them on trial. We should put these people on trial.
I think you have to make a distinction between Iraq and Afghanistan, because of course they were fought for very different reasons. Afghanistan, whether it was the appropriate response or not, was a response to a horrendous attack on the people of the United States, on individuals, with hundreds of people being murdered by a terrorist group that was based in Afghanistan. And we responded by saying, we're going to go into Afghanistan and we're going to put these people out of business.
The people who did it.
We're going to put these people out of business. And as it happened, of course, the existing Afghani government was in collusion with the people who had done 9/11. Okay, so the Al Qaeda and the Taliban, while not one and the same, were certainly working hand in glove together. So we said, we're going to go into Afghanistan. We're going to put the Taliban out of business. We're going to put Al Qaeda out of business, and we have a right to do this because our national sovereignty has been threatened. And almost no place in the world denied that. The French had headlines saying, how terrible this was, and yes, America should do this. Nobody denied that a nation has a right to respond to being attacked. The problem with it is having done that, we then didn't know. We didn't have an exit strategy, and of course we couldn't have an exit strategy because we were moving pretty rapidly. We didn't have an exit strategy. We didn't know what to do with Afghanistan once we overturned the Taliban. We haven't, I think, been particularly successful at creating a democracy there or any kind of.
Well, I don't think so at all. Obviously,
and it's very hard to imagine how you create a democracy where, less than 20% of the male population and an infinitesimal percentage of the female population can even read.
Well, that's a whole other subject. But
right, but I'm talking about democracy building is not easy in a place like that. But that's very different than Iraq. I think you can make a strong case that there was no reason whatsoever to go into Iraq.
Yeah, but that's almost like a separate here. But let me bring it back to the Guantanamo people. All right, so
they are all from Afghanistan.
Okay, so we captured these people on the field in Afghanistan. Right. I don't know the details of each case, and one of the reasons I don't is because they don't put them on trial. If we're a democracy and we're waging war to defend our democracy, or in the name of democracy, or trying, God forbid, to institute a democracy in other places, which is naive and crazy in some ways. If we're trying to do all of that in the name of democracy, then What about cruel and unusual punishment? In other words, we have certain bases of our democracy. We are not showing them to these people no matter what they did.
No, that's right. And of course...
And the world sees this.
Yeah, and here's the complication. The people in Guantanamo were not captured by our traditional criminal justice system. They are essentially prisoners of war. I mean, the problem is we didn't want to call them prisoners of war because they weren't in uniform. They weren't. They didn't have any of the normal, recognized international law notions of what constitutes an enemy soldier. So we didn't know what the hell to do with them. Can I say that word on Sirius Radio?
Hell?
Yeah.
You could say a lot worse than that.
I'm just
freedom of speech, babe.
Well, yeah, I know, but I don't want.
I know you want to maintain your dignity. You're a law professor.
Oh, yeah, and I don't want you to lose your FCC license either.
There is no FCC license. That's the point.
Okay. Good.
Satellite is outside. We're enemy combatants on the field here.
Okay.
You know,
good.
we don't have any rights.
All right.
Well, we have every right.
So the problem is we don't know what to do with them because
I have an idea. Put them on trial.
Yeah. Well, okay, and we don't even know what we want to put them on trial for.
But doesn't a human being deserve the same rights as laid out in our Constitution? In other words, that's the point of it, isn't it?
It is.
So what? They're not wearing a uniform. They're human beings.
I feel like you're beating me up here.
No, I'm just asking. I'm
trying. I'm not giving you. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do this. I'm trying to explain to you what I think our dilemma is.
Okay.
One of the things about being a professor, professors do various things. We teach students. We go to meetings. We do all that. We also do scholarship. We write. Mm-hmm. And people often ask, what are you doing? You sit around writing books and nobody reads. You're writing about esoteric, weird stuff. There's this professor at University of Massachusetts at the Dartmouth campus, UMass Dartmouth, who spent his whole career writing completely useless, arcane, weird stuff about Chechnya. And of course, now he's famous because suddenly we.
Yeah, well, one person's useless is somebody else's gold mine.
Well, it was useless up until 2 weeks ago, and then suddenly he's famous. Right?
I approve of scholarship. I come from an ancient tradition where if you want to study, the color of a butterfly's wings for your whole life, that's fine with me.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that one of the things that the scholarly world does. What we academics get paid to do is to theorize and to come up with ideas, to come up with ways of dealing with new problems.
Review at
Professors do various things. We teach students. We go to meetings. We do all that. We also do scholarship. We write. Mm-hmm. And people at University of Massachusetts at the Dartmouth campus, UMass Dartmouth, who spent his whole career writing completely useless, arcane, weird stuff about Chechnya. And of course, now he's famous because suddenly we.
Yeah, well, one person's useless is somebody else's gold mine.
Well, it was useless up until 2 weeks ago, and then suddenly he's famous. Right?
I approve of scholarship. I come from an ancient tradition where if you want to study, the color of a butterfly's wings for your whole life, that's fine with me.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is that one of the things that the scholarly world does. What we academics get paid to do is to theorize and to come up with ideas, to come up with ways of dealing with new problems that haven't been thought through. And quite frankly, I think the legal community, the academic community, has not done a very good job of sorting out what ought to be the way you deal with enemy combatants, if that's what we want to call them.
Not representing a sovereign nation.
Not representing a sovereign nation in this new world we live in, where there are wars of terror rather than traditional wars.
Well, if we don't come up with an answer, then what happens is we go on and on and on and on.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, I've just written last night. I just finished the final touches on a very long law review article. Mm-hmm. Which will appear in the University of Chicago Law Review in a couple of months, on a guy named Francis Lieber. Francis Lieber was a professor at Columbia University who wrote the code for the way the U.S. Army should behave during the Civil War. It was promulgated as General Orders Number 100, and it's known to the world as the Lieber Code.
This is during our Civil War.
During our Civil War.
Okay.
Okay, so this is an example of an academic who has been thinking a lot about the law of war and international law for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, Civil War comes along, and he's really important. Because he writes this code at the request of the War Department, and it's promulgated as General Order Number 100, and it has lots of things about how you deal with prisoners, how you deal with property. Much of the Lieber Code is still used today. Much of the Geneva Convention stuff comes. The Lieber Code is the great-great-grandfather of the Geneva Convention.
See, that's interesting. You mentioned Geneva Convention. Obviously, it covers sovereign nation uniformed people.
It doesn't cover enemy combatants. That's the point I'm making.
We're human beings.
We are groping. It may be, it's conceivable that in 25 years from now, somebody will look at Guantanamo and say, how come they didn't come up with the solution that we have now come up with? Because we haven't come up with a solution. President Obama came into office and said, I'm going to close Guantanamo. And he sent down fact finders, very smart people. I know a couple of them who went down for Obama. They went down and they came back and they said, well, here's our report. And the president said, well, I don't know how to close. We don't have. If we try them in civilian courts, then we would have to make the argument that somehow they broke American law while they were in Afghanistan.
Well, there are international courts.
We could try them in an international court, but I think we're reluctant to do that, and I think international courts would be reluctant to take them, quite frankly, because international courts deal with different kinds of issues. So the alternative is to try them by military commission, which we have done in the past in Guantanamo, and then we're left with the problem that even if we try them with a military commission, we're first of all not sure what we're trying them for, and we're not sure, quite frankly, what to do with them if we convict them. I mean, it's a huge problem.
I sort of have to stop there because we are at the end of the hour, and I have yet to take my break, and I don't want to, refrain from selling gold or whatever it is they sell here. So I have to do that. I love talking to you.
It's a pleasure.
I love talking to you, Paul Finkelman. And give the
Well, I'm a professor at Albany Law School here in Albany, New York, and
the website.
And my website is paulfinkelman.com, or they can go to albanylaw.edu to the website of the main law school and get to me that way.
Okay, we're going to take a break now, and I'll be back after the break. And I really appreciate your coming on and having this discussion. It's always enlightening.
Good, it's been a pleasure.
Okay, thank you. Bye. Let's go to a break, and we'll be back. Okay, Mike Feder here. I am informed that we do have a couple of people on the line. We can take one call. Anybody else who's calling, feel free to call after the 7 o'clock news. That's what I usually do here is take all your calls. That's we can do it earlier, but we can do it after 7 o'clock for sure. Who do we have? Tim from Detroit. I can only give you like 2 minutes at the most.
Yeah, and I wanted to kind of talk longer too. But
you know what? What's a good idea then is to call after 7 because we can talk at length then.
Yeah, I can call back after 7.
Why don't you do that? I mean, or you can hang on if you want to, or call back after the 7 o'clock news. There's 3 minutes of news. And then we can get right into it. And anybody else who wants to call after 7 o'clock, because you heard a couple of really good discussions here tonight, 866-997-4748. So, Tim, you want to call back then?
Oh, hang on.
Yeah. All right, cool. Call back after 7 o'clock news. And a couple of other things I wanted to talk about after 7 o'clock, depending on how many calls we get. And it's the idea of who's a terrorist and what terror is. And I think I mentioned this last week, and I keep talking about this all the time. And this is not to excuse what anybody did or who's bad and who's good. But what goes around comes around. When we're talking about terrorism, the United States has been terrorizing the world inside this country and outside this country for a couple of 100 years now. And I mean terrorizing. There's a description by the field manual, the United States Army field manual, which describes terrorism. And that's basically what we've been doing for, the last couple of 100 years, inside the country and out. you have to know that if you keep, and we talked about this earlier with our guest, when you keep doing things to people, they will keep coming back at you unless you change what you're doing. We can't go around the world, all over the place, dropping bombs on people, atomic weapons, and using drones, and dropping cluster bombs all over Iraq and other places without paying back. You know, if we're a terrorist nation, we're going to be terrorized. I'm not saying that's the only reason these people are attacking us. They have their own bizarre, fundamentalist, murderous point of view, but just the same. All we can do as human beings and as a country is take responsibility for ourselves. And that's what I'm talking about. So there's something that you should think about and maybe call what your opinion about that after the 7 o'clock news. As for that, we will, in fact, be back after that and get right into these issues. Tim, don't forget to call back. Okay, we're back. Mike Fader here on Sirius XM Left 127. If you want to get in touch with me, go to my website, Fader Files, Feder. It's a German word, pronounced Fader, all right? It's not Feder. All my life, people call me up on the phone, you know, like these salespeople or something, or I call somebody up. They say, Mr. Feder? No. And, after a while, you know how it is? You get tired of correcting people if you have a name like that. You know, you just give it up. You say yes, whatever. So Fader Files, FederFiles.com. And you can see what else I do on the radio. You can see the essays I write. You can join my mailing list, and you can get in touch with me. We have anybody who wants to call about the stuff we were talking about before, feel free, or anything else. You notice that President Obama went to the opening of the Bush Presidential Library, which, of course, is the biggest joke I could possibly think of. Did the man ever read a book? And if he read the Bible, I don't think he absorbed what was in it. But here's a guy who probably never read a book, who's got a presidential library. He's got all his papers in there. I wonder if he's got all the notes in the papers where they decided to invade Iraq, even though they knew there was nothing going on. You think he has those notes or papers in it? The idea of a presidential library for this guy is beyond comment. So obviously the current president has to go there. Obama has to go there. If it was me, fuck tradition. I would never go to the opening of a library for a major international war criminal. People would hiss and boo at me and say, oh, you broke tradition. Tradition to honor a man who is responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people? No, I wouldn't do it. And they could yell at me all they want. Besides, I have my second term in office. What do I care? I would not go to this weasel's library's opening. All right. So, Tim from Detroit, you're on.
Yeah, I don't think Bush can read or write in any case. But
imagine a library dedicated to George Bush. I mean, God, what's he got, like pamphlets on weed whacking in it? Anyhow, Tim,
this is a guy who, what did he do? He went to clearing his fake brush when he was told that 9/11 was going to come in August.
Well, wait a minute. The presidential library, speaking of what he did in 9/11. Yeah, right, he was...
Remember that? He got the PDB, and he went on vacation. He told us, hey, okay, you've covered your ass, now I'm going to go on a vacation.
Yeah, the guy came to him with a report about almost exactly what was going to happen, and he said, okay, forget about it, which, of course, leads people to speculate very righteously, perhaps, that they all were in on it. So, I mean, but you know what? There is one book that's probably in his library, My Pet Goat. I bet that's in the presidential. Maybe that's the only book in the library.
He was reading that to the kids.
Yes, My Pet Goat. They may have like a leather-bound copy of it signed by him.
And then he got caught like a deer in the headlights, right?
Yeah, and then the first thing he does as a brave American is scoot underneath a mountain in Colorado somewhere.
Sure.
Yeah, he's our warrior king. Anyhow, what were you going to say?
You know, the guest, and I've heard a lot of these things before. In fact, I just heard on the Rachel show the other night. You know, half the people at Guantanamo now have been completely cleared of any charges.
Yeah, that's true. I was trying to get a word edgewise with him, and there's a couple of cases, one of which I was going to bring up, of a 15-year-old kid who they captured.
And the other 50%, it's pretty ambiguous stuff. I mean, his whole premise of enemy combatants is just complete garbage. Any constitutional lawyer that's looked at this seriously says there's no basis for enemy combatant. And the Geneva Convention under Article 3 does cover people who aren't in uniform. How do you explain guerrillas, for example?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, so I don't know. This guy was making a lot of mistakes.
Well, I think those basically were the main ones, but there weren't too many other ones. I think he was just basically talking about issues and trying to open. He was more like asking questions than giving answers.
Which is kind of like making the conservatives' argument. You know, like, well, we can capture them because they're not wearing uniforms and hold them indefinitely.
But that's only one small part of what we were talking about.
For one thing, the whole authorization of the use of military force. I mean, that's not really a declaration of war. It was just something Congress voted for in '01.
Yeah, but that wasn't what we were talking about for like 75% of the conversation. But if that's the part that you were objected to, I could understand that because I've been reading lots of articles about
you want to talk about kind of the exception for the Miranda, that kind of thing.
No, it's okay. You can talk about what you like. I'm just pointing out that was only one thing that he was talking about. You know.
Right. Well, I guess I'll mention one more thing too, actually, and I heard this from Hartman, and he said it to the New York Times that actually the Afghan government was willing to hand over bin Laden to a third country, provided that the United States actually had evidence to show that bin Laden, in fact, was responsible for 9/11. So, and I mean, I've known about that for many years too. That the Afghan government, probably might have cooperated. There's a lot to that whole thing. I mean, don't forget Bush met with the Taliban back in April of '01, and he promised them a carpet of gold or a carpet of bombs if the Afghan government didn't want to cooperate in building a pipeline through Afghanistan. And in fact, when Karzai was supposedly elected, I mean, he was the executive of Unocal, which was one of the companies responsible for the building of the pipeline. So, what we're told in the official media often is just, at best, it's inaccurate, and at worst, it's often a deception.
And the least of it is that, including all the things that you say that are true, once the United States military shows up there, they're right on the trail of the guy they say who did it, and then they just turn around and go to Iraq.
Yeah, didn't they have him on three sides, and then they just left?
Oh, they had him cornered, absolutely cornered, and then they just abandoned it. Because if they did that, then there's no excuse for anything else. They actually catch the guy,
The argument is, okay, they did have to go fight in Iraq, right, or get ready in Iraq, but didn't they have enough troops left over, even if and I wasn't for the Iraq war at all, but I mean, they didn't have enough troops to stay there and to catch bin Laden?
But that's the point. If you catch the guy that they say did it, but he probably did. He probably was the person behind it. If they catch that guy, they have no excuse for invading another place.
So in other words, this thing's been a giant sham. I mean, this whole war on terror and this whole business of invading Afghanistan, and of course now we know with Iraq that was a complete lie to begin with. The whole WMD thing, and
except that bin Laden, and there are other people like bin Laden in the world, access to tremendous amounts of money, weapons, a lot of which we gave them to fight the Russians, right? However, these people are crazy and they're murderous, and they are out there.
Oh yeah, jihadists exist. I mean, I'm not denying that.
Right.
I'm just saying in our treatment of the whole issue of terrorism, I just think we kind of break our own laws and constitution as we
every
go about
minute. Every minute.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like, okay, what is the basis of an enemy combatant? Who are we at war with? If it's the Taliban, is that a nation state within a nation state, or is the Taliban a nation that comprises many countries? I mean, where do you define the capital for the Taliban?
What about Al Qaeda?
For a war with Al Qaeda, where do they exist, and how many kinds of Al Qaeda are there?
Well, we don't know, and maybe we do know a little bit. But the problem is I think what's behind all this is that countries always need a bad guy, and these are our new bad guys. We lost it with the Russians. We had to find another one, and now we got another one. We can extend this war, quote unquote, forever, because you can never defeat terror.
So, in other words, it's just you're going to kill innocent men, women, and children just for the arms industry, basically, and for the minerals industry and whatever rich guy makes money off this stuff.
Because there's 10 to 20,000 crazy people in the world who want to blow us up, or who are reacting righteously to the way that we invaded their various countries and maybe blew up their relatives. Because of these people, it's an excuse for vast corporations and government policies to create war forever. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, I guess it's a little different subject, but I mean the IRA, and you still hear occasional attacks in Northern Ireland by IRA kind of separatists, but how did they finally begin to effectively, deal with that? I mean, didn't like Mitchell go under Clinton and negotiate with the IRA and eventually said, okay, look, we're going to create a semi-independent Northern Ireland, and therefore, okay, if you guys promise to disarm, we're going to earnestly, have earnest negotiations with you guys, and eventually the IRA sort of melted away, right?
Yeah, I mean, people have to be willing to talk. I mean, there's a lot of indications, actually. I don't know about the Taliban. There's other indications that the Taliban is willing to talk, and it's hard to say. I mean, people have tried to negotiate with them, but then sometimes I think that they're not in control of their own people, which is a separate problem,
Well, yeah, I mean, and okay, now we shoot from Afghanistan all the way over to the Fertile Crescent. I mean, okay, now a lot of jihadists say, well, the reason they're fighting is because of the occupation of Palestine. So, and then of course this guy who supposedly bombed Boston, and I think he did it a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
His cause probably was the Russian occupation of Chechnya, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're always going to have people who are either mentally ill or who are very motivated, who are going to find some sort of semi-justifiable cause to fight back.
And then there's the people who are the mirror images of people like Bush or the major corporations here,
right.
Who will always need a war themselves and will find any excuse for it.
Sure. Now, you notice now the U.S. is sort of beginning to kind of inch its way into Africa?
Africa, we've got 2,000 Marines in Australia, so it's China, and then it's North Korea, and it's Iran. We will never run out of bad guys, which means that weapons companies will always be in business, and people will always get elected, and generals will always get promoted. This is what's important.
And nobody's talking about the TPP anymore. Remember that we were sort of talking about it.
Trans-Pacific Partnership, right?
And that's probably going to sail through without even any debate, right?
Sail through because the government in Washington is not our government; it's their government.
And then, what happened to all the American jobs? Let's elect the Democrats. They'll save us, right?
Yeah, lesser of two evils.
So they elect the Democrats, and they do just about look what Obama did with Social Security now.
Yeah, well, check out what happened the other day. Almost all the Republicans and a whole lot of Democrats voted to set aside the sequester temporarily, which is causing tremendous misery. Like, for instance, old people and people aren't getting food stamps and people aren't getting fed. They set it aside temporarily because there was flight delays to give money to the FAA to make sure that there weren't any flight delays. Well, this is what they could do. And that's an incredibly bad precedent because if the Democrats went along with this. In other words, if they're going to give in on this, they can give in on every single other thing and pick and choose what to fund and what not to fund, which is exactly what the Republicans wanted.
I remember you got all these callers before the election. They were really putting you down, like almost personally.
Oh, about Obama. They said I was going to, that I was a terrorist.
You probably don't care, right? But I mean, they almost like impugned your integrity for not wanting to vote for Obama because it was sort of the same thing.
I was somewhere between a naive idiot and a lunatic and an out-and-out hater of the Republic.
A couple of people accused you of being a Republican. I was like, this is hilarious.
Well,
as it turned out,
it doesn't seem to. Yeah, I think that everything I said about him being the lesser of two evils, which is a lot of nonsense, is he's the same as the rest of them, is exactly true. It's all been borne out.
Yeah, I mean, the drone strikes are still going on. Now we're cutting back on social programs. And, of course, none of this is going to pay down any of the debt, which they claim. Of course, this is all baseless.
None of this will pay down anything unless we raise taxes on people with all this money.
So, anyway, I guess that's what I called. I mean,
yeah, I hope you feel better now.
Still fine.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Take it easy.
All right. Who do we have? From where? Okay, caller, you're on. From Washington, D.C.
Hey, how are you? I just wanted to thank you. One of the things I love about your program is that instead of just having 30-second sound bites, you actually have real discussions with people.
Well, because I love it myself. I mean, to have these guys on, like that other guy, just to have these kind of conversations which range in every direction are so educational to me, and I assume they are for other people,
Oh, no, he brought up so many great points. And I think the interesting fact about it is that most people today, when they're looking at the political paradigm, they somehow, again, want to constantly make things a left or a right type of situation.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is it's just, the faces may change, but the policies that are in place by, powers that be are going to stay in place. If Walmart doesn't want something done, it ain't going to get done.
Well, I think things change on the surface. In other words, and there are certain issues. For instance, the president can campaign for gun control, or he can appoint somebody good to the Supreme Court. If we're going to accept that as the best we can do, while everything else is business as usual, we're in trouble.
Yeah, no, it's it's kind of interesting. Like I find it a little bit hypocritical how like Democrats now are suddenly wrapping themselves in the whole gay marriage thing when it was not even a year ago Obama was against it, Hillary was against it,
mm-hmm.
But suddenly now they've and then they're making it seem like for the last 20 years they've all been for it. But they do a survey group and something comes out, and next thing you know, it's like, okay, well, the winds have changed enough for us to be in support of this issue.
They have no moral background, and they have no integrity. They blow the way the wind blows to get them elected and to sponsor their corporate backers. That's what they do. They don't have any meaningful intellectual or emotional investment in anything moral. These people.
Well, and at the end of the day, isn't the definition of a leader a person that will stand up when it is not politically expedient to take a position on things? But I love some of the other things that your caller brought up. A lot of times people don't want to talk about one of the most important things in this whole dynamic is the petrodollar trade and the support of, as long as oil is traded for in dollars. The one thing you notice is that everybody who's on the rogue nation list, whether it be Iran, whether it be formerly Iraq, whether it be Libya, what do they all have in common is all of these countries, the moment they start saying, I'd like to get paid for my oil in something other than dollars, suddenly all of these humanitarian rights and things like that suddenly bubble to the surface, and we have to do something about it. I joke because the Obama administration dumped well over $1 billion in supposedly liberating Libya. If you had taken $1 billion, you could have taken and built about 200 liquid natural gas service stations so that maybe all of the going up and down the East Coast could fill up with American energy as opposed to filling up with foreign. And I think that would have done more for our security than any sort of regime change that we're doing in Libya. But the thing that stood out most to me with the Libyan thing was, and this is kind of a telltale sign of it, was the fact that you can look this up. About 3 or 4 weeks into the course of their supposed civil war to overthrow him, the rebels took a timeout to start a bank. Now, I've never heard of a revolution going forward where the rebels take a timeout to start a bank. Very, very telling. Now, this whole thing with Syria here, I'm really going to believe that Assad would be stupid enough to use chemical weapons, which would just basically give Western nations a carte blanche to go in and start doing something? Or am I more inclined to believe Western nations would be inclined to stage something in terms of a chemical attack, blame it on Assad so that they can use it as a prelude for them to justify their invasion, just like we did with WMDs. So that's kind of what's piquing my interest right now.
Well, see, this is. I was thinking about this the other day, and I think we were talking about this on the air. When you looked at when we read the paper, the shocking headlines, when you're watching TV or the internet or whatever, and you see what happened in Boston, right? And then within minutes, the first thing you think to yourself these days, and I think maybe this is not just relegated to people who are on the left, quote unquote. One of the first things that occurs to a lot of people these days, which is taken seriously by millions and millions of people, and this is something that never would have entered our thoughts, even way back in the 60s or 50s or something like that. You take it for granted now, if you're educated enough, that when something like this happens, there are different choices of who's behind it. One of them being your own government, right? Now, I'm not saying it is in this case, but when you look all over the world, and you mentioned this with Libya and other places, with Syria, excuses. Look at Iraq. I mean, a total government sham lie set up to invade another country, a violation of our own constitution, every human right on earth, right? So we see over and over again the United States government internally and externally lying and making things up and finding false villains and then doing what they want to do. And then there's this whole 9/11 thing, which is a whole other discussion, but it's part of it. The first thing, if one of the few alternatives that occurs to you is, oh, these guys are with Al-Qaeda, these guys are crazy, they did it on their own. CDB, when you go down the list and the third or fourth thing turns out to be maybe your own government was involved, this is a very sad state of affairs.
No, it's kind of interesting that the word conspiracy theory gets thrown around a lot, very loosely nowadays. And I feel what happens is, it's kind of like, I remember Ron Paul during, his first and second presidential runs, where he pointed out the fact, look, the reason why we're running into these problems is the fact that we're violating our own, what the founding fathers advised us to do, which was not to go interfering in other nations. None of this nation building type of stuff. And you have all of these yin-yangs on the stage somehow trying to say that, they're trying to get our freedoms and freedom this. And I'm like, what freedoms are we talking about? You mean the same freedoms that we're sitting here arguing about, and they're trying to do CISPA with the internet surveillance. At the same time, we have this past week that the bombing came out. They were talking about the fact that the bipartisan commission on looking through the war crimes that the United States was guilty of, mass knowledge of us torturing prisoners and so forth, and the fact that nobody's being held accountable, it just becomes very, very convenient in the scope of things, because now suddenly everybody's directed towards something else. And I think about the irony of this. This Boston thing goes on. They mobilize, and basically the police forces are turning into, de facto, Stasi troops running around our own places. They did not catch these guys. It was done by some guy that, he goes in his backyard to have a smoke, and he notices the guy sitting in his boat.
That's one of them. The other one was a trade-off of like 200 rounds fired between the older guy and the cops.
Right. Well, we'll see what that story is going to be too. Just like
I don't know. See, but that comes back to the basic issue: is who really trusts their government anymore?
Right. And I think this is part of the.
But maybe that's not. Wait, maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we were too naive before. Maybe it's better. It's more grown up not to automatically trust your government.
Well, maybe we go back. Can you go back to the founding fathers and ask them what their feeling was?
Well, you know what? The whole the whole way they structured the Constitution was based on the fact, in a way, that people shouldn't be too trusting of authority. That's how they structured it, and they understood that.
Concentrations of power.
Yeah, they understood that.
To abuse of power. The interesting thing about it, I try to explain this to a lot of people about like capitalism and stuff, and the thing that people don't understand is when a company gets to a certain size, it realizes instead of being innovative and making and giving a better product and service, it's so much easier just to go and manipulate the government structure so that they make barriers to entry to prevent competition from taking their place.
And also not to tax that corporation.
Oh, absolutely. How does Apple Computer, which, up until a year ago was the largest company in the world, pays an effective tax rate of 9.8%?
And GE, which made, $10 billion profit in 2011, pays no taxes at all?
Right.
Yeah,
right,
so in other words, if we as a people could get our government, which is a big joke already, to do what we want them to do, if you tax these corporations, they're going to have to come up with better and newer and more helpful and lower cost products for people to make money. But now, if they can just do whatever they want and not be taxed and pay anybody anything they want and ship jobs overseas, they don't have to be so inventive and creative. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I got to move on.
Yeah. Hey, I'll leave it with one thing. I go back through all the wars that have taken place in U.S. history: Spanish-American War, World War I, Gulf of Tonkin, what WMDs with Iraq, all false flags, staged, designed to manipulate the American public into going to war that they did not win to. And so if you think about it, who's the biggest mass murderer? It ain't John Wayne Gacy or some Son of Sam's of the world. It's our own government going rogue and doing things they shouldn't be doing.
Well, I agree completely, and there's a lot more evidence from that, which I was going to mention, and I may later in the show. Okay,
Appreciate it, man. Thanks again.
Who do we have? Robert from Knoxville. You're on, Robert.
Thank you, Mike. A comment on Guantanamo Bay, if I could.
Sure.
Can you imagine what that's like right now? It's a house of horrors. They are force-feeding, apparently, at least a couple of dozen people. I don't know if folks realize what that is, what's happening there. You strap someone to basically what you think of an old electric chair. Their head, arms, feet can't move. Insert a tube down their throat. Push the food through, and they have to sit there for at least a couple of hours, unable to get to the bathroom or anywhere where they could regurgitate or anything else. Possibly one of the most degrading things, I suppose, one human being can do to another. And it's going on every day. I saw the other day where we were sending more quote-unquote medics to Guantanamo Bay to help with this situation. It's unbelievable.
Well,
Barack Obama, who has portrayed himself as somewhat of a humanitarian, has of course acted just the opposite, Mike. It continues to astound me what we've got a hold of here in this president.
He was the lesser of two evils. I kept being told during last fall when the election was going on. I don't see him as the lesser of two evils. To me, he's just one more branch of the evil.
I don't either, Mike. It's absolutely incredible. It's going on every day, and we can't even get to this place to protest. All I would know, if we all had the convictions we say we do, there'd be 1 million people outside of the White House saying, we're not eating until those people are either charged, brought to trial, they see the light of day, they're treated like human beings. We're not eating until they eat. We're not eating until they get justice. You see, Mike, we just won't do what is necessary. And I'm not saying I'm any better than anybody else, but I tell you, this makes me physically ill to think about what's going on down there. And I wish you would get an expert on who knows more than me to tell in vivid detail what it takes to force feed somebody.
I can probably try to find, I've had lawyers on before who are defense lawyers who've flown down there, and I could try to get somebody on again about that.
Man, I would love to hear, I would love for all of us to be made to hear what happens. I mean, my God, man. And can you imagine what that place is like? Imagine the people who are our people who are having to do this to someone else. What are they going to be like for the rest of their lives? I mean, my God, man.
I mean, you know, all the more reason to you know, the law professor I had on before, Paul Finkelman, who I like talking to, you know, he's saying, it's generally understood that a lot of these people are bad actors. We don't really know that.
We don't know that.
We don't know that. And secondly, we may even know that a lot of them aren't. And I've read other reports which say that they aren't, a lot of them. And the other thing is he's saying we don't know exactly what to do with them. Really? I know what to do with them, and I didn't even go to law school. Put them on trial. They're human beings. They don't have to be American citizens. Put them on trial. If they try to kill somebody in a village or in a field in Afghanistan, and you catch them and you have the evidence, and put them on trial and prove it. Otherwise, let them go, or democracy is worth nothing.
Absolutely. And Mike, here's one other thing that I want to say that I believe that why we will not let these people go. Do you know what I'm going to say? It's because they're going to talk. They're going to tell what they've been through. They're going to say what the United States has done to them. Now, we'll have our machines in place, of course, our PR machines or whatever you want to call it, propaganda machines, to discredit them before they ever came out, if they ever got out. But they're going to tell what hell is like. And anybody who doesn't believe there's a hell, it's existing in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
Yeah, and
you can bet your ass on that.
And think about Guantanamo Bay. We have the Spanish-American War, right? And so we fight with the Spanish Empire, one of the worst empires there ever was, vicious, murderous people, right? So we take we take over their empire, right? And so we basically own Cuba, right? You know, we didn't actually install our government or make it a state, but basically we own and we run Cuba. We set up our corporations there, which treat people like serfs and slaves. We back vicious dictators who kill people, who shoot people, who torture people, who lock people up for the slightest infringement of what the dictators see as their rights. And then we install on this captured island, we install as part of an empire now ourselves, a military base on a foreign country. Our military base is in a foreign country, and there's supposed to be some sort of eternal lease or some bullshit, which is basically because we bullied them into it and threatened them that they didn't want to be invaded again or were turned out of office, these dictators, they would grant us this. Basically, we granted it ourselves. So we take over from one of the worst empires that ever lived, one of the most vicious, murderous empires that ever lived. We take over. We're the new empire. We take over a country. We build a marine base, which we still have there, and a naval base, and we have Marines there, on the tip of a foreign country where we don't belong, and you can understand how they feel about having us there. Imagine if some country like Russia or China had a naval base in part of California or Maryland. This is what it's like, right? So we have that there. Then we lock these people up. We don't charge them. We don't know if we're guilty. What democracy exists here? You know?
There is none. There is none.
And it's our history, too. We have a responsibility to understand our history. We captured this from one empire and took it over. We have a naval base in a foreign country. We don't have the right to be there.
Absolutely.
And you know the reason I say this? I don't hate America. I'm saying it for what you said before. You talked about the people who have to be down there, medics and guards or whatever. Maybe they recruit the most sadistic people they can find. But we have I believe we have a kind of a collective soul, America. And the karma that we are inflicting on our soul, the stain on our soul is so huge now that I don't know how we're ever going to wash it out.
It's staggering, and it's continuing. I just cannot believe. I wonder, of course, Barack Obama is insulated from a lot of things and surrounds himself with people whom I don't understand. But how he lays his head down at night, knowing what's going on at Guantanamo,
because he's delusional.
When start dying, what's he going to do?
Because he's delusional. Just read it. You know, it's like the Emperor's New Clothes. No one, even though everybody is pointing out that he has no clothes, he can't hear it because he lives in a bubble of advisors in a mansion that we gave him. He doesn't even hear it anymore. The man is effectively delusional. All presidents are, and he is especially, I think. Anyhow, I got to move on.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks for calling. What do we have? Chuck from New York. You're on, Chuck.
Yes, hi. You got a great show. I'm a first-time caller.
Great.
My comment is this. I, too, am extremely disappointed with the president. I thought he was the lesser of two evils.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the man is acting as if he's under house arrest. I think he came in with some very good ideas.
Mm.
And somehow something in the system now has prevented him or scared him from even trying to carry any of these things out.
When you say house arrest, you're almost implying that he's acting under fear somehow.
Yes, and the other thing, too, is I read somewhere where a lot of the Secret Service were Bush appointees.
These are things I really don't understand. I mean, there is a theory. There is a lot of, and it's like what you're proposing here, is that he is really in there under sufferance of people who are much more powerful than him. And there's a limit to what he can do, even though he may want to do more. I don't see it that way. I think that for various reasons, he thinks the decisions he's making, and I think he's making them on his own. I don't think he's being forced to do it. He thinks that these decisions he's making, which are anti-democratic and which are unconstitutional and which are reprehensible and which are at best weak and failing policies, I think he does this because he believes that they're right, that he's been convinced that they're right, not that he's threatened. That's what I think.
Well, if that's true, then he turned out to be the evil of two lessers.
That's what I think. I think, I don't think he appointed some good people to the Supreme Court. He has some, when he has some good ideas about, gun control. He has this, he has that. The bottom line is the bottom line. The corporations and the military and the CIA and other people run the government. And maybe he is afraid. I don't know. Maybe he is afraid. After all, the people have been assassinated in this country. I mean, JFK was assassinated. To this day, when people look around for suspects, one of the first places they look is the CIA.
Well, not only that, but if you can't trust your Secret Service.
Well, I don't know about that. Now, that part I don't know about. I don't know who those people are or who appoints them. But,
I'm not saying that. Yeah. I'm just saying, if you really want to run this theory out,
mm-hmm.
He may be very extremely intimidated at this point.
I don't know. I think it's hard to say. It's a good question. In other words, how free is this man to act? I think my opinion is that he's doing what he thinks is right, even though he's very wrong. And I think he's delusional. And I think that basically he's in the pocket of the rich and the powerful, and he doesn't even know he is. Anyhow, I've got to take a break. We have to go.
Yeah. Take care. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for calling. I appreciate it. And call back. All right.
Yeah, fine.
Okay. Let's go to a break. Want to go to a break? Okay. All right, we're back. Mike Feder here on Sirius XM Left. Here's a quote from the most recent version or edition, I should say, of the U.S. Army Manual, the U.S. Army Field Manual, defines terrorism as, quote, this is from the U.S. Army Manual, calculated use of unlawful violence or threat of unlawful violence to inculcate fear. It is intended to coerce or intimidate governments or societies to attain political, religious, or ideological goals. That is the United States Defense Department's interpretation of terrorism. What was Hiroshima? Atomic weapons have never been used in the history of mankind since they were developed, except by one country. Dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and August 9th, 1945, clearly identified and known to the authorities who dropped this bomb and to the president who said to drop it as civilian populations. Right? Civilian populations. The war in the Pacific still being fought. People were contemplating an invasion of Japan. Whether or not it had to be done, we don't know. It could have taken years and years and years to lay siege to the place before they gave up. Another argument is, well, dropping these bombs actually made them make peace and tell the rest of their troops who were still fighting in the Pacific to give up. That's a true thing. I'm just pointing this out. Calculated use of unlawful violence or threat of unlawful violence to inculcate fear, coerce or intimidate governments or societies to attain political, religious, or ideological goals. That's terrorism. So we use terrorism. We dropped bombs. We killed 200,000 men, women, and children who were not fighting us, who were innocent people, who probably, if you asked them, and they were free to admit it and free to say, couldn't care less about the war, and at that point certainly didn't want the war to go on, and if they could have, would have applied to the emperor or Hirohito, who was, because it was a military dictatorship, to stop the war and bring their husbands and their sons home from these various islands they were spread out on. If you asked them, nobody was asking them. So we decided to help on this war, instead of destroying the remaining enemy soldiers and risking our soldiers' lives, we decided to destroy 200,000 men, women, and children. Nobody has ever done anything like that. Nobody has ever done anything like that in history. In Vietnam, we decimated that country so badly, we probably killed 1 million people down there. Maybe half of them, or 3/4 of them probably, were civilians. We burned villages. Rapes occurred frequently. People were murdered. Grenades were tossed into people's houses. The amount of destruction that went on there, and in neighboring Laos, hundreds of thousands of people were murdered. B-52s dropped millions of tons of bombs, more than in all of World War II, from 20, 30,000 feet onto jungle areas where there may have been bands of Viet Cong or maybe battalions of North Vietnamese soldiers, maybe. And in the process, murdered hundreds of thousands of innocent people, terrorized them. What could possibly be more terrifying than all of a sudden everything around you for a mile in every direction blows up and turns into dust, including you and everybody in your family and everybody you know? Then we spread Agent Orange, which they knew in advance was going to be poisonous and kill people. Ultimately, they probably even knew it was going to cause birth defects. This is Monsanto and DuPont we're talking about. You spread it over this whole country, destroy the foliage, destroy farms, destroy everything. And what is that if it's not terrorism? And then these drone strikes, which the president personally approves of, are partially meant to kill targeted people who we say are enemy combatants, and some of them probably are. It's also specifically designed to create terror among people, so that I don't know what we think, that these people are going to go and fight the Taliban because we're blowing them up, so they don't want to get blown up, so they'll take care of the Taliban by themselves. And what about in 1991, was it January or was it February, I forget now, Shock and Awe, where we send laser-guided missiles and from a distance of 500 miles or 1,000 miles from ships or from various bases, and we blow up whole blocks in Baghdad. How many thousands of people were murdered and destroyed, innocent people, because we said we had pinpoint bombing? That was shock and awe. Look at the words they use, shock and awe. We terrorized that place. We're terrorists. This country is a terrorist country. People are terrified of the United States. And here's, I can only quote from part of this, an article by Robert Scheer, Scheer, in Truthdig. You can check this out. Look, Truthdig and Robert Scheer, and put the word terrorism if you want to find it. President Obama made clear that anytime, but this is in response to the bombings in Boston, anytime bombs are used to target innocent civilians, it's an act of terror. In America's role in the deployment of anti-personnel mines and our country's refusal to sign off on a ban on cluster munitions agreed to by most of the world's nations offers the most glaring analogy with the carnage of Boston. To this day, anti-personnel weapons, the technologically refined version of the primitive pressure cooker fragmentation bombs exploded in Boston, maim and kill farmers and their children in Southeast Asia way after our country's experiment in genocide there during the 60s and 70s. An experiment that, as a sideshow to our obsession with replacing French colonialism in Vietnam, involved dropping 277 million cluster bomblets on Laos between 1964 and 1973. The whole point of a cluster weapon is to target an area the size of several football fields with the same bits of maiming steel that did so much damage in Boston. The International Committee of the Red Cross, which has been active in attempting to clear land of remaining bomblets, estimates that 10,000 Laos civilian casualties to date from such weapons, and they're still going off. As many as 27 million unexploded bomblets remain in the country, according to the committee. And cluster munitions were used by the Soviets in Afghanistan, by the British in the Falklands, and by coalition in the Gulf War. NATO forces dropped 1,765 cluster bombs containing approximately 295,000 submunitions. Anyhow, most of the world has signed off on never using these again, but we haven't. This is a country which terrorized and murdered the native population when Europeans first came here and then stole all the land from them. This is a country which actively involved itself in the importation of slaves, where something between people estimate 15 and 20 million Africans died in the Middle Passage or over because of their treatment here on plantations and other places where they were whipped and murdered and tortured and raped. This is a terrorist country, and we got to be very careful about waving the flag and screaming about the terrorists who want to attack our freedoms. One of the most terrifying countries that ever existed in the history of the world is the United States of America. Ask the Indians. Ask black people who are descendants of slaves. Ask people in almost every country in the world, who is terrifying you the most? They may come up with the United States. Just the other day in the newspaper, we read about the collapse of a garment factory in Bangladesh. It was illegal and funded by international companies that had garments manufactured there, including Walmart, which bought labels, which bought products that were made in this garment factory. This is terrifying. 300 people were crushed in this building. Maybe more, they're finding all the time. Why? So that the Walton family could get more than $100 billion. They need more money. The United States is a terrifying country. It has terrified everybody to establish itself in the first place and then to invade and occupy the rest of the world and make it safe for profit-making organizations and corporations. Okay, bottom line, when we use the word terror, when our president uses the word terror, when people think of our flag and they salute it and tears flow and you see it at a game and it's 100 yards long and 50 yards wide and everybody puts their hand over their hearts, wake up. This is sheer ignorance and criminal irresponsibility and lack of awareness that we are a terrifying terrorist nation and always have been. We're the bullies of the world. And we have to understand that if people are going to want to attack us, it's not just because they hate our freedoms. By the way, a lot of them do. In these fundamentalist religions and in these dictatorships, they do hate our system of freedoms because it's a threat to their own paternal dictatorship and their bullshit religions. And I'm including all of them. They hate us for that. They hate us for that. But believe me, that is not the main reason that people attack the United States. It's one of the reasons. But we have to be, our responsibility, just like you have a responsibility in your family and in your personal life to be responsible, to be aware of the fact of what you say and do, how it affects other people. I, in my time, have actually terrified other people when I had a terrible temper and I let it go on people, even physically. I understand what that means. Part of growing up is not to be a 20-year-old anymore or a 15-year-old and think you could just do whatever you want to people. You have to understand that what you say and what you do affects other people. You know this from your own life. If you don't, you're probably not even listening to this show. You're probably listening to something else. But you know what I'm talking about. You have to accept limitations. You have to accept the fact that you have to responsibly behave in front of other people if you want them to have anything to do with you or to love you or to care about you. The same goes in the world. countries, nations, it's just all larger expressions of the smaller family and individual units called human beings. You can't terrify people and then be shocked when they come back at you. That's all I'm saying. Do we have a caller? Roberto in Dallas. I can only give you a couple of minutes. Go ahead.
No, thanks. I appreciate it. This is the argument I just had with someone. I'm not going to be loyal to a country that's not loyal to me. I feel no compunction in being loyal to a country like this. The slaughters. I've lived overseas. I've seen what America does to people's, farmland because we want to eradicate drugs. Because we want to take advantage of some indigenous people's, natural resources. So unfortunately, I have no loyalty to this country, and I have a dual citizenship, and I'm about to leave, and and I feel I don't feel any loyalty, and I'm looking forward to leaving because I just feel like this country has finally, gotten to a point where nothing that we want as citizens ever happens anymore.
No, I agree completely. I agree completely with that. I mean, I could think of 100 things that would probably feel like the decent thing to do, and millions of people agree. Like, you just name it, and the government is not doing one single one of them.
Well, yeah, and the main thing that I was pulled over in Oklahoma about a year and a half ago, and I'm Latino, half Latino, and this racist cop just went off on me, almost put me in the hospital, and then came back 2 months later and said he found drugs on me with no evidence, never showed the drugs, nothing. And I'm having to go back and forth to Oklahoma to fight this liar who lied on the tape, who lied in the statement. And I asked the lawyer, I said, why is the judge even considering this case? He lied through his entire statement. Well, the deference is always given to the police officer.
Mm-hmm.
Really? After he beat me and put me in the hospital and almost killed me? Deference is given to a man like that? That's when I said enough is enough. I want out of this country, and I never want to see it again. We are allowing the drug war to control this country for money, for profit. Mike Pence, that piece of garbage in Indiana, increased marijuana penalties so he could stuff the jails with more people, because he gets money from the prison lobby. Mm-hmm. The 15% that used to be the factory workers and the laborers that made a decent living that could take care of themselves are now the prisoners in this country because none of those jobs exist, because we ship them to Bangladesh, because we ship them to China. That kind of country, I'll be more than happy to say I'm no longer a citizen of. Mm-hmm. And that's a horrible thing to say. I never thought I would get to this point, but I just see the vast corruption and the sickness that money has caused in politics in this country.
Amen.
So thanks a lot. And no matter what, I'm going to somehow get serious where I'm at so I can listen to your show. I listen religiously, you know what I mean.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Yeah.
I listen every Saturday.
No.
So thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Yeah, I was brought up in the 50s, World War II. I was a Boy Scout. Salute the flag. Tears in my eyes when I thought of the guys at Iwo Jima, voting for the president, everybody getting out on election day, July 4th, setting off those firecrackers, all the veterans in my neighborhood. I was proud to be an American. Then I went to school, right? And then I got to college, and then I actually learned things about our country and how we set it up and what it represents and what it's been doing in the world. Then comes Vietnam. I haven't stood up and put my hand over my heart or saluted that flag for 40 more years now, 45 years. And I see no reason to do it until this country actually starts acting the way it's written to act in the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. When all these empty words are full words, when somebody says democracy and somebody says humanitarian and somebody says freedoms and somebody says liberty, and it really means something, then I'll put my hand to my head and salute. Then I'll put my hand on my heart. Then I'll look at the flag and say it means something. Until then,